Welcome to the second lesson in this course. In this lesson we will start to set up all the things that we need to build our website. So first off, you need to install a program called Visual Studio Code. In theory you should be able to code in any text program, but we use a program like Visual Studio Code because it can help us with a few things. It can, for instance, autocomplete some sentences, and it also gives your text these funny colors that help you to spot mistakes and just see what is where. Just go online, search for Visual Studio Code, and install the latest version for Windows or iOS, depending on what you're using. The second thing that you will need is Chrome. There are many reasons for this. Most of them are not very important for us. There is one, however, that is very useful, and that is when you right click on the page and go to inspect. You can see all of the code that we are going to make ourselves, and you can see what does what and why it happens, and if you have made a mistake you can use this interface to find that mistake. So that is very useful. So the next thing you should install is a extension. So if you have installed Visual Studio Code, you go to this little icon right here. You click on it and then you can search for extensions, because that's another thing that a specific coding tool like Visual Studio Code offers, is that you can use extensions. And you are gonna search for live server. I have it already installed, but just click on this and install it. What that does is that you don't have to refresh the page every time you want to see the changes that you have made. So when you have done these three things, install Visual Studio Code, install Chrome, and install the live server extension, you are ready to start making your first website. And to do that, we first need to give the website a place to be stored on your PC. So we go into your files manager, or just go to any folder you want and make a new folder. And give that folder a name, for instance, my first website. And now you go into Visual Studio Code and open this folder in Visual Studio Code. So I'll search for the folder and I'll click on it. And now I just select the folder, and as you can see in the left here, my first website. So all the coding we will do will be stored in that folder on your PC. The next step is to make our HTML page and our CSS page. So you just go to this bar, right click on it and say new file. And we call the HTML file index.html. There is a reason why we call it index. This is basically the home page, but the way I understand it is that Chrome and all the other browsers just know that index is always the first page. If you want to add more pages to your website, you just make another HTML file and call it like second page.html. And just by typing .html at the end, the browser will know that this is an HTML file. So we delete this one. And now we make our CSS file. So new file, style.css. It's really that simple. Now we're actually going to start to put the first code on the screen. Because of this program, the first few lines are going to be really easy. So we're going to use a little shortcut. If you type HTML, you see HTML .5, you click on that one, and now there appears a whole lot of code. Normally you would need to type all of this code yourself, but since this is basically the same for every website, Visual Studio Code just does it for us. I'll quickly explain what we have here. All of the blue texts are basically tags. They are what we use to tell the browser what things are. So right here we have a head tag. This is the starting head tag, and this is the ending head tag. And within these tags is other code. These lines of code are really not very important for us. If you need to know any of this later on, I'll tell you then. What we will be using a lot more is the body area, because in the body of the HTML page, you type all the code that will appear on the screen. Let's just quickly, for practice purposes, make the title that we made before. We first need to type some tags. And for this little title, we're going to use the h2 tag. So I type h2 and then I can click right here or click tab, and I have two tags, starting tag and the end tag. And within these tags I can type the title that I want. So for instance, my first website. And now let's open the browser up here. We now have a live view of the website that we are building. So we've now written our first line of code and we can see it in Chrome. That's pretty awesome, right? The next thing we are gonna do is link the CSS page up to our HTML page. And we need to do that in the head. So we go in the head, enter, and type link. And we have some presets right here. We're gonna click on CSS. And it's basically all done. If I had given this another name like web.css, I would need to type web.css, but this is correct in this case. Every time you have made a change, you need to save it to be able to see it in both HTML and CSS. And I would recommend to use Ctrl S instead of going up here and say save every time. So now we have linked up our style sheet and now we can type some CSS stuff. Let's just try that for a minute. We have made this title with H2 tags. The H stands for heading and the 2 is a preset for the size. For instance, if I make this 3, it'll just make it a little bit smaller. And if I make this 1, it will just make it a bit bigger. We can use H1 to H6 to make headings on our website, but for now we're gonna make this an H2 heading. And now we're gonna go to the style sheet and type H2, because by doing that we are telling the browser that we want to target the H2 that we typed in the index.html. Next you need to make these brackets, and within these brackets we can start telling the title what to look like. And you will see every time I type something and it shows up in the list, I just hit tab and it finishes it for me. So now I can give it a color like green, and if I save it, it is green. If we were to go to our HTML and add another title, it would also be green. But if I make this an H1 title, it is not green and it is a bit bigger. Do you understand why? Well, we have not targeted H1 here, we have targeted H2. If I were to now target H1, make these weird brackets and give it a color like, let's make it aqua, and now it also has its own color. So that is how we add content in HTML and then change it with CSS. You can now delete these lines of code and the CSS that we did, and just save everything. So basically delete all the stuff we put on the page, because in the next lesson we will start to build the layout of the page first. I'll see you in the next lesson.